Okay, I want to be respectful for everyone's time today, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for joining us today for our second series, I should say, Lunch and Learn in this series for Eclipse Lunch and Learns. Today, we're going to be talking about presenting and speaking to folks on the eclipse. As I mentioned, for those of you who may be joining, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, where you're calling in from, and what organization you are with. I think there are a few folks on here that may be new to me, so I'm going to go ahead and just give a quick overview. My name is Davies. I'm the Night Sky Program Manager for Hill Country Alliance and also heading up the Hill Country Eclipse team. And we introduced these Lunch and Learn sessions 2 weeks ago as a means to needle down a little bit further in detail with regards to eclipse planning. If you're not familiar already, we have quarterly eclipse roundtable meetings. But these are a way to dig a little bit deeper from those standard meetings that involve a check-in and usually presentation by a subject matter expert. So today we're going to be specifically talking about presenting and speaking to folks. And if at any point in time you have any questions or comments, please feel free to either raise your hand or just unmute yourself and go ahead and speak up. I want this to be a really open forum for conversation. I'm going to go over just very briefly and quickly an example of the presentation that I give when I go out to speak to the public, and then would love to get into a little bit more of a deeper conversation about maybe presentations that those of you have given, what questions you may have, concerns, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So this is a fairly decent example of the general eclipse presentation that I give. I've added in a few new slides, so some of you may not be familiar with them. We're hoping to actually take this presentation and make a video of it, post it to the Hill Country Alliance YouTube channel so that folks can reference it, can use it, and the general public can have information about these upcoming eclipses. So for those of you that may have seen a variation of this in the past, usually I will change this solar event guide information to just include who I'm presenting to, usually the organization or group, the date, and if there's any reoccurrence, if it's a regular meeting or a monthly gathering. So what I've included are a few just very brief informational slides. This one sort of is a little bit more technical. And with the presentation, I have bullet point sort of notes or facts. This one specifically goes into why and how we can have eclipses because of the size of the Earth and the size of the moon and the size of the sun, and particularly the ratio between the size and distance of the Earth and the moon. I go into a little bit further detail with this illustrating total solar eclipses versus annular solar eclipses, why we have them, why they occur, and this just sort of highlights also what they're going to look like from where we are. I like to touch on path of the eclipse because this is very important since we do have a total eclipse and an annular eclipse. And for an annular eclipse, as most of you probably know, you cannot look at it at any point in time with the naked eye. So it's important to discuss the differences between the two and also how important it is to be in that path of totality and the importance that if you're on either side of these lines for annular or total eclipse, you will not experience the whole thing. I go into, again, a little bit more detail about the various points of contact. This is very good for illustrating to folks, especially that in this beginning of totality, end of totality, you need to take those glasses off or you won't be able to see anything. And that at no point in time during the annular eclipse, even between beginning and end of annularity, those glasses must stay on because some aspect of the sun is going to be visible, and even 99.9% of coverage is not enough. I get illustrations and mappings like these from a couple of websites that I'll show you links to in a moment. So I usually will try to zoom in on areas where I'm specifically talking to. If I'm talking to a group in Mason, I'll zoom in on this space, or Hondo in this space, just to illustrate, roughly where their community is going to fall on this path of annularity. Depending on the group, I'll also go into timings, and these are timings that you can get most commonly are best from a website called Time and Date, and I'll show that to you momentarily. And it illustrates the starting time of both the partial and then going into the annularity, beginning and end, and then the end of the partial, and roughly how long they can expect the duration of annularity to be. This slide is just looking at the county seats within the Texas Hill Country counties. Same with the with the total solar eclipse mapping, and then the timings for the beginning, end of the eclipse, and where totality falls into place. And more importantly, for this eclipse, what the duration is of totality. Here, because we have so many cities, I've broken it down into those that are sort of within the 4-minute time frame of totality and those that are not. I also like to try to draw some correlation between populations of communities that were on the path of totality and roughly how many visitors they estimated. And then in some cases, comparing them to the populations of either the community I'm speaking with or a selection of communities across the Hill Country. I usually touch on opportunities and achievements, highlighting education, tourism bolstering, media attention, astrotourism development, general education, and then of course the challenges of, hard to get glasses, needing to order porta potties, traffic, drawing on the cell service, shortages in groceries and water and fuel. I have some of these forecast cloud maps that come from a couple of resources on the American Astronomical Society's Eclipse site that just sort of highlights why we are such a good spot in the Hill Country to observe these eclipses. Same with cloud cover. And this will probably differ for you. I go into referencing our Hill Country Eclipse portal and a few of the key features on our page. This may be you featuring pages and resources from your own Eclipse page if you're a community that's running one. I've got a brief map that outlines our representation across the Hill Country Eclipse team, and then just a finer detail of those communities that are involved. I have a breakdown of tips for residents, for retail businesses, for lodging, things that are really basic, like keep it simple, open lines of communication, don't charge too much for your services in case, we want these folks to come back at a later date to patronize our community. I have an outline that goes through some of the key features of an eclipse that folks should be aware of if you happen to be observing it and you're not around an astronomer or a knowledgeable eclipse expert, things to look out for. I reference our partnership with the American Astronomical Society and the resources they have available. And then I've provided both a 2023 and 2024 calendar of events. These are specific to Hill Country Alliance, so looking at both our roundtable meetings, these lunch and learns that we're hosting, as well as the upcoming workshops that are being hosted on a biannual basis by the American Astronomical Society. And then leaving my information at the very end. And I'll go real quick and just reference those two sites that I was talking about, websites for resources. Okay, so this one is linked on our Eclipse portal, and this actually has a multitude of eclipse dates listing. So you can both look at the annular eclipse coming up in October 2014, and you can also click on the total eclipse, and these will give you that sort of Google Map spread and show where that path of totality and annularity lie. And then you can actually put in either a key location or an address in the search bar, and it will give you those parameters. Time and Date is another location. Hopefully you're seeing this website here. And they have not only a multitude of options to look at various, sun and moonrise and such, but they have a really great resource for eclipses too. And it lists both the annular solar eclipse and the total solar eclipse with maps and detailing that you can also search and pull up timings for as well. And I know I did zoom through that pretty quickly because I just wanted to give a very brief overview of what I present in a general capacity when I go on and speak. This is a presentation that's targeted mostly at adults and professionals. I have recently been asked to present to a group of fourth graders, so I'm actually working on a variation on this that will be targeted probably two different types of presentations targeted at much younger children, elementary school level, and then a presentation that has a little bit more science behind it, like some of those diagrams for both secondary and high school levels. So does anybody, I know I kind of said it, I went through that really fast, but does anyone have any questions or comments before we kind of jump into conversation? Well, awesome. I'd love to hear from you all. How many of you have presented on the Eclipse already? And in what capacity have you provided visual aids, or have you just spoken? Have any of you already presented or are looking to present in the near future? And just feel free to go ahead and unmute yourself to speak.
We have several at the City of Parker Heights. We have several presentations that we have coming up. I'm going to do one for caregivers in our area. We found out that a lot of our care centers were completely unaware of what was going on. So I am working with the Texas Association for the Education of Young Children to do that presentation. And we have already started with the science all summer. We did at least one thing a month for our elementary kids, as well as when we did a science expo. We're sort of putting it in there so that it won't be brand new. They will have already heard it several times. And so we've done about 3 children's presentations, 1 science fair, and then I'm working on the upcoming presentation for our city council. They already know about this, obviously, but we're letting them know exactly what we have planned to do. But and then we're talking to caregivers.
That's fantastic. I love that you're putting together a presentation both for youth and for caregivers. Would you mind sharing, maybe just a couple of components with regards to maybe how you're differentiating those presentations from one another, and what maybe, especially the emphasis around caregivers, is really important?
Absolutely. So for caregivers, we're really emphasizing safety and giving them the information they need. They really, it's one thing to have one young child that you're trying to show the eclipse, and having several young children, you really need to do more inside activities. You will not be able to control them, and they can't keep glasses on. There's a lot of different things. So we're really focusing on how to deal with a group of kids whenever we talk about to caregivers. We are also thinking of lots of indoor activities you could do that so that you really don't have to run the risk of damaging eyes of our young friends. Whenever I do it for youth, it's very different. It's incredibly hands-on. The interesting thing is we are going to do a component of our caregiver workshop is going to be, this is what you can do with youth, and we know it works because we've been working on it. We started with sun science. We thought that it was appropriate for how hot it's been, and we talked about what are parts of, what is sunlight, how is sunlight coming, how does it change during the eclipse, what is different about the eclipse? Nothing. Nothing really changes. It's just that you're going to be staring there at them. So I think that they're that they are very different. One is kind of fun and games, and the other is I really need you to understand how important it is. Oh yeah, and here's some fun and games.
Mm-hmm. I love it. Great. Are any of those resources that you would be willing to share with the group at some point?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can share this. I'll be doing this presentation on the 9th and so of September, the big one. And I have no problem just I can give y'all all of it. It's perfectly fine. I really think that that's a place that is maybe being overlooked.
Mm-hmm.
So
Absolutely.
I feel that because we think they're too young to enjoy it, but they're still hearing it. It's going to be exciting. But a lot of caregivers, just for the point that they haven't even thought about, you mean it's on a day that it's like, it just didn't occur to them. Oh, it's on a day that we would be normally in school. I said,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Exactly. Well, and actually it's rather apropos. Yesterday we just hit the point where, it was 7 years ago that we experienced the total solar eclipse. I'm sorry, 6 years ago that we experienced the total solar eclipse in 2017. And I like to think that, educators are a little bit more knowledgeable and a little bit more prepared. But for those that aren't, especially, folks that are homeschoolers or part of homeschool collectives, I think that's really important. And I could see even something like the presentation you're talking about, working really well, for a whole nother set of caregivers, for folks that are maybe caring for the elderly or disabled as well. I think that those are both areas of individual groups that are highly overlooked. So I really appreciate that. We're actually hoping to add to our Eclipse portal, flush out a little bit more of a solid resource page. And so we will have both this presentation and any other presentations or resources that folks would like to share with the group and with general public available up on there as well.
We are already working with a local retirement facility to take out information to them. So if we are able to work that out, I will put it up here to let you know what we were able to work with them.
Excellent. I know one of the resources that one of the groups within the American Astronomical Society is fleshing out is a design that was utilized very popularly in 2017, taking this eclipse film that can come in large sheets and finding ways to drape it over things like pop-up tents so that individuals that maybe needed to be seated or in wheelchairs could be brought underneath it and look up and have the effects and advantage of seeing the eclipse without having to wear glasses, which is both important for, the elderly, children, but also just folks in general that, don't like to have anything physically touching their face. There are a lot of adaptations that groups have been coming up with to work with, all kinds of concerns or general issues. All right, Marianne Johnson's put in the chat that they've presented several times at the Comfort Public Library. That's fantastic. With slides, hands-on activities, brilliant. That's great. Anyone else wish to touch base on sort of what they've done with presentations or planning to do with presentations? Oh, thanks, Raleigh, for putting that information in there. Yes, so you can actually reach out to Sarah Raleigh with the Whitty Museum, who can share photos of the tents that have been made for eclipse sheeting. Or is there anyone that wants to present and maybe has questions or concerns or really just doesn't know where to start? This is, again, just a forum to kind of have conversation, to ask questions, bounce ideas off of one another, and discuss, getting this information about these two eclipses out to as many people, as many groups as we possibly can. So don't feel shy. I know one of the things that some folks might feel concerned about when it's presenting is knowing what's the right amount of scientific data or what's the right amount of data in general. I usually like to start off my presentations asking folks who's seen a total solar eclipse or who's seen, a solar eclipse of any kind. And that generally really helps set the stage, to get a sense of what people's familiarities are with these phenomena, engaging them. And, maybe in most cases, they experienced the total solar eclipse in 2017. In some cases, I've had folks who experience it and remember it back in 1979 here in the States, and other folks who have traveled to other locations to experience the solar eclipses. So it's a really great opportunity to kind of get folks engaged and involved in the conversation, but also get a sense of what their familiarity is before you kind of dive into either, heavily talking about, the science behind eclipses, or, if most folks raise their hand and say, yeah, I experienced in 2017, you can kind of tailor what you're going to discuss and how you're going to discuss it with them. But in general, I would say that the best course of action is just to assume that your audience is not going to have as much information as you will, and that even rehashing of information they already know is both going to be educational and beneficial. So I'm curious, has anyone else on this call presented? And you don't need to necessarily speak on it, but it would be nice to kind of get a sense of, who has presented. Looks like J-Bar chimed in that their presentations are directed at infrastructure, sanitation, and what is needed to host the high numbers. That is very important. I have a feeling that there are many of us already who are very dependent on J-Bar for their sanitation needs for this upcoming eclipse. And we are very grateful for your presence in the Hill Country.
Somehow I haven't actually presented on the eclipse yet. It is coming, and I have to like create all the presentations. But one of the things I just want to put out there with, when we think about presenting on eclipses is there is so much information, so many activities that's already out there. It's already been created. There is no need for us to recreate the wheel here. We want to be, in fact, it's easier if we're using consistent messaging so that, people will see, hear the same message of, we're your viewer, we're your protect your eyes throughout. I did drop in the chat, NISENet is the National Informal Science Education Network. They have a ton of great resources on solar eclipses, including the hands-on activities, and how to get supplies and things like that. So I dropped that in there. That's a really good one. And yeah, I mean, just, when you're looking at your audiences, remember that everybody likes to have fun when we're learning. We don't have to limit ourselves to lectures. Now, some audiences prefer a lecture because they want to like sit back and receive. They don't want to put themselves out there. But some audiences really want to have like people come up and volunteer or have some interactive aspects. So there's a lot of fun ways we can approach the science that like I said, already exists. So if you need directions to resources, I can help with that.
That's fantastic, Riley. Thank you. That is a very valid point, because a lot of folks learn in different ways, and sometimes that is more hands-on than just audible learning. So whether it's using the meter stick activity where you have the moon on one end and the sun on the other, Riley brings up a really good point of the amount of resources that are out there, whether it's graphics or animations or activities. And we will continue, any link that is shared, in these calls with relative to, each individual topic, we'll make sure that these get updated and put on the Hill Country Eclipse portal and get disseminated out to everyone, because we don't want you to feel like you are having to recreate the wheel. And so if there's anyone that has concerns or needs of materials or links or references, please feel free to reach out to anyone in this group or myself, and we will definitely try to help you get that information. Patricia, you had your hand up.
Yes, we just had a major meeting last Monday with 100 people in attendance. General public meeting, and part of the focus of that meeting was to put the onus on how each individual wants to experience the eclipse. Did not focus on the science of it. Had local authorities from the judge to Commissioner Mosley to city, chamber, and BBA, and Dr. Goldstein, which is an optometrist, to talk about eye safety and explain to folks that it needs to be looked at as in a very positive way. And of course, the generic handouts and 5 real sources of information that they can educate themselves, and education for their businesses to start a plan. For the eclipses, it was left blank as to which eclipse, but it started with educate yourself, all the things that could be challenges, such as money, fuel, etc. We all know the list at this point. And simply for the businesses as well, contemplating employees. And that checklist was a 1-pager just to hand out. It was very well attended. I think it got the point across to our local citizens that the powers that be do have very good plans in the works for handling both the annular and total eclipse.
That's great to hear. I love that you specifically point out, putting the onus on people and how they want to experience it, because not everybody necessarily wants to experience the eclipse wearing glasses or wants to be in large crowds. Some want to, are going to want to maybe view it solitarily. It can be a very personal, very spiritual, and in some cases very religious, experience. And I also think it's important that kind of draws parallels to how you view the eclipse, whether it is with solar glasses or whether it's, with, a handheld panel, welding glasses. I mean, there's so many different ways, and even indirectly, as a lot of you have probably seen, doing the pinhole box with a sheet of paper to looking through, a pasta spoon, or, my favorite, I've mentioned several times, a Ritz cracker. There was a great exhibit at a science museum in Casper, Wyoming during the 2017 eclipse, which had just a multitude of household items and food items that have holes in them, or even, little small openings that you can, hold up to the sunlight and see, the little crescents filtering through it. So there are a multitude of ways to both physically experience it, and how you may choose to, personally experience it. So I love that you addressed that, Patricia.
Okay, Jack wants to say something.
Morning, ma'am.
Morning.
Tricia and I just left a county eclipse meeting. We had we had a local Tatum gal, and we had two, one out of Kerrville, and then a regional one with us. We learned one more time, they have not made any major plans as to what they can do to assist at this point. That was just a half hour ago. When I got back to my truck, I had a phone call from a friend of mine whose wife owns a pharmacy, and he's starting to hear about it. And he asked, should she close her pharmacy for the Monday of the 28th? I mean, of the 8th. And I said, I can't say that, it's up to y'all, but I would recommend that she starts telling all of y'all's customers to stock up early. And I think that's something that needs to get out to all the pharmacies to tell their people.
And that was also something stressed to everyone at that meeting, to have your prescriptions, no doctor's appointments. And in addition to protecting your eyes, no matter how you do it, remember to protect your camera lenses, or any lenses, that you can burn them up. And just short, sweet bullet points. Going back to the first item on the checklist, educate yourself. Most every decent or good website out there, from the AAS's to Great North American Eclipse to eclipse24.org, all of those have succinct, quick, good information on them.
And one thing that we may not be thinking about too, because we're all wrapped up in the excitement of the eclipse, is that this is an event that takes place during the day out in the sun. So wear, sunscreen, have a sun hat, have, sun clothing or some kind of cover to protect your skin, because even though it's April, it's still going to be hot. It's still going to be warm. We're still going to have sun beating down on us. It's still prime time for that sunburn, especially because the sun will be so high overhead, and it will be such a lengthy period of time from beginning to end for both the October annular and both the total as well. So not only taking care of your eyes, but also just taking care of your body in general, staying hydrated, making sure that you have enough water and enough coverage for that sun exposure.
Hey everyone, this is Blair Manning from Burnett County. I just wanted to let y'all know, so we have done a few presentations already, just very brief overviews kind of leading up, and then this fall, when that 6-month marker comes around, we are pretty busy. But some of the people that we've presented to are our Rotary groups, our Kiwanis groups, all of our chambers. We've done outreach within the community and at our local libraries. A lot of our POAs and HOAs. We've presented to the commissioner courts and just given them updates. And then we will also be presenting to a Texas Tech class in the fall here in the Highland Lakes at their location. And part of our town hall meetings that we are going to be giving this fall, we are breaking into kind of quadrants of our area just to manage who's attending where, so that it doesn't get quite so overwhelming.
Fantastic, Blair. And I know we discussed a little bit about caregivers and students. I'm curious if anybody, I mean, I know for the most part, some of the schools have just recently started. But, obviously this has been a planning for some time. I'd love to hear from any of you who have presented in the schools or plan to present in the schools, and maybe how your technique may vary in that environment with students. Is anybody set up to do any of that? All right. Well, maybe as we get further into the school year, there'll be more of us that will be asked to do that kind of work. I know that for most of our task forces across the Hill Country, they're involved in one capacity or another with their school districts or their superintendents. And now that we are so close to the annular and getting ever so close to the total, and that school session is beginning, I have a feeling we'll see a lot more speaking requests and a lot more information being shared about ways to educate students of all grades, activities, as Rowley mentioned earlier, more links that we can give you with directions on how to create devices that are both, low price or low cost, or maybe even how to get some free materials for educational purposes. I know that with the American Astronomical Society's workshop coming up at the end of September, there's always really great resources from those. And I know I will be attending that in person, and I have a feeling, I know some of you already have plans to attend that. So we'll have a lot to bring back to this Eclipse team at the end of September, beginning of October, with things that we've learned and can share and disseminate. But I know part of the conversation is, beyond just presenting, but really also knowing how to speak to folks. And as Patricia mentioned, there are really great resources out there that are just single one-sheeters that can be provided. But, having a good 5 or 6 bullet points sort of in your virtual pocket, if you will, of, things to tell folks. Of course, the importance of eye safety, I think, is one of first and foremost, letting folks know that they're 2 different eclipses, and that one requires that eye safety and eye coverage at all times if you're going to be observing. And in the case of the total eclipse, you have to take off any sort of eye covering or eye safety glasses during totality. But just also the various things that folks can experience during the eclipse. We're at a period of or entering a period of solar maximum, which is the high level of activity that the sun goes through about every 11 years. So, any situation in which you can talk about, utilizing the amount of time before the totality kicks in or before annularity to observe the sun safely and look at sunspots and look at any flares or prominences is a great way to just educate folks about the sun in general. I've found that in doing solar outreach, there are a lot of folks out there that don't even know that we have simple technology to look at the sun safely, and that it's a totally new concept. So, with these eclipses come a whole new level of learning and education for folks that maybe wouldn't necessarily have that opportunity. Any other questions or things that come to mind that you'd like to discuss about presenting on the eclipse, talking to folks on the eclipse, or, if tangential comments or questions? I know in some cases, you might be contacted by the media or by groups that want to do, interviews. And we do have one of our roundtables coming up with regards to presenting and talking to the public and public relations with the senior science reporter from KXAN. But it's great if you, intend on being around the general public and potentially fielding questions, to just have a few, 5 or 6 facts and bullet points either in your head or in your pocket that you can draw upon. Because as we get closer to these dates, more and more folks are going to be asking and putting out inquiries and seeking out knowledgeable folks, of which, you guys, for the most part, are some of the more knowledgeable ones in the Texas Hill Country about these events that are coming up. So you're going to be the subject matter expert sources for your communities. So I'm curious, most of you, are working on this in a, professional capacity, whether it's through your job or through affiliations. Have you found that you're talking more about the eclipse in your, personal circles with your friends and family, and kind of educating them? Are folks, kind of having that experience where they not only find this crossing into their, professional life, but also into your personal life? And what kind of experiences have you had?
I've been talking with everybody who'll listen because it's been such a big deal here at our library. So I'm kind of talking to everyone, all of my friends and family. And, basically, if you're not in a position to need to do it professionally, a lot of people just don't. There's no reason for them to really know a lot about what's going on. So I'm trying to, do it in a positive way, but to also let them know, something's coming down the pipe, and you may not be working for a city, but you also may not be able to get to work on that day, or you might want to take it off, or you might want to make sure your mom, who is wheelchair bound, has a way to see it.
Hmm. That's a really good point. I like Mary Ann Johnson's comment in the chat: all eclipse all the time. I've even thought so far as to creating a sticker or a pin I could wear that says, ask me about the eclipse. Because of course, as you mentioned, folks may not necessarily know, especially if they don't know you in a professional capacity, or what, you're working on, in the scope of, your community or your task force. And if they don't reach out, if they don't know that you have that information, they may wind up being on the wrong side of the path of totality, or waking up April 8th going, why is everybody so abuzz? What's going on? And despite as much information as out there right now, I have a feeling we'll still all have a few of those stories after April 8th, of that one friend or that one family member, that one co-worker who went, wait, there's an eclipse today? You kind of go, how did you miss it? I'm seeing a lot more on the news and in the newspapers. And of course, we're going to see an increase as we get closer to the annular. And then once October hits, after October 14th, I think it's going to be a much higher frenzy of interest. I like your comment, Rolly. Yeah, eclipses are coming, eclipses are coming. I'm going to be completely lost and confused on April 9th. Yeah, I don't know about the rest of you. I think I'm just going to sleep all day on April 9th, maybe even into to April 10th. One of the comments that was made during our last roundtable session was the fact that, all of us have been working so hard for months, and in some cases years, for something that ultimately, the peak will last top of 4 minutes and 26 seconds. And at best, the whole function of the actual eclipse will last just a few hours. And that's a lot of work for something, so short a period of time. But I think we all have the huge benefit of, touching a lot of folks and educating a lot of folks, and finding ways to help folks experience this, in many cases, a once in a lifetime experience for them. And I will, just as last time, I will stay on, till 1 o'clock on this call, or even beyond, if any folks have questions or wish to discuss things after the fact. But mainly, these lunch and learns are just an opportunity, as I discussed earlier, to just hone in and talk about very specific individual topics, and answer questions. We had some really great feedback and suggestions for future sessions. We do have still a few that haven't been scheduled with topics or speakers. So, if you have any ideas, whether it's, during future meetings, or even in this meeting, or in between lunch and learns, for things that you would like to learn more about or hear more about from subject matter experts, please feel free to email me or put in the chat, because we want to make sure that you all get the most out of these sessions, and that it's not just me sitting here speaking, ad nauseum about, the various topics. I want you all to feel engaged and be, have an open forum to ask other folks about what they're doing in the community, because we are so significantly spread out. There's only about 23 to 24 counties represented in total on the Hill Country Eclipse team, but 85 counties in the state of Texas are going to experience totality. So we're a small portion, but we're a very large amount of folks and people of all ages and all educational backgrounds. So, we do have a fair bit of responsibility. So I want to make sure that you are all thoroughly as prepared and knowledgeable and informed as possible. So like I said, feel free to just chime in with questions or comments. I guess next time I maybe have some background music set up for those silent voids in between conversation, but feel free to even chime in on things that are off topic if no one else has anything to discuss regarding presenting and speaking. Oh, Carol, that's a great question. She asks, has anyone presented to private landowners? And that's a really great question because there are so many private landowners in the Hill Country and so many who will maybe want to consider taking advantage of opening up their land for visitors. Can anyone speak to that? Has anyone presented to private landowners or had conversations with them about the upcoming eclipses? Carol, have you had people asking you to present to private landowners, or have you already been speaking with them?
Yes, am I unmuted? Yes. I have been asked different communities as far as, in particular, AgriLife, asking, what are some options, and working with their communities as far as we also have some counties that have open range and are concerned of what that looks and feels like from all aspects. So anyway, just throwing it out there to see if anybody's had those conversations. And I know AgriLife has done a couple of pieces on the eclipses coming, but it's more of a statewide thing, and so not necessarily in particular to regions. And so again, just looking to see what's out there.
Mm-hmm. Looks like J-Bar commented that they are providing services to private landowners, and I'd say that's probably one of the most important aspects of any private landowner considering opening up their space for either an event, to a group, or to the public in general is, do you have waste services covered? I know some of the other conversations I've had with folks about private landowner usage for the eclipse is, what kind of infrastructure exists? Is the road to where they would host people paved? Is it gravel? Does it require high clearance vehicle? What are the circumstances whenever it rains? We aren't expecting, I'm hoping and praying, no rain or inclement weather anywhere around the days leading up to the eclipse and on the day of the eclipse, but it is something we have to take into consideration. A little bit of rainfall, especially after not having any for so long, can really wreak havoc on the terrain, especially rural terrain. So that's something to take into consideration unless you know a really great tow truck company that's going to be in the general vicinity. So, things like, traversing terrain, waste management, both, restroom facilities, trash, water accessibility, are you going to need to clear any land? Is there anything, dangerous that needs to be considered with regards to wildlife or, uneven terrain or plants? Jeff Finking mentioned when contacted by private landowners, they discuss fire protection, huge component, law enforcement that they may not be able to provide, so needing to look elsewhere. They discuss how to handle the waste, both human and trash. And then last, discussing parking issues. Fire protection, that is a huge component, especially if you consider not just on private land, but also, folks that maybe haven't gotten to their destination by the time the eclipse starts, or, isn't planning to go anywhere particular, but just pull over on the side of the road. That gets into a very dangerous situation with, even mildly high levels of grass, or any kind of vegetation on the underside of these vehicles, can start up a fire. And we all know that that is something that we cannot tolerate in general, but definitely not in our drought situation. The grass around most of the hill country is very dry and primed for that kind of environment. So that's a huge component to discuss. And that's probably something we'll also go into a little bit more detail as well when we talk security and safety coming up with the fire chief of the city of Kerrville. But those are all very good points that you're addressing in the chats, everybody, about fire protection enforcement, waste management, and again, also just, you know, not taking advantage of folks either. I saw a lot of signage on private road entries and, you know, come observe the eclipse for, you know, 20 bucks a car kind of thing. But I know there's some circumstances that some of us may be familiar with a bit of price gouging with regards to overnight accommodations and events and functions. And, you know, we definitely want to, you know, a lot of our communities want and see this as an opportunity to, you know, bring profit and bring, you know, commerce and, you know, financial, you know, benefits into a community. But we also want to ensure that, you know, folks have a great time at a reasonable expense and are enticed to come back again and visit the hill country. Does anyone else have any comments on, you know, private landowners or speaking with them, or questions about, you know, talking to private landowners and what to prepare for, or any other aspects or issues?
So I will ask Dawn another question on have people, communities, because hill country is well known for its hunting seasons. And so what are the communities and maybe what are these private landowners working out with on hunting leases of people who think maybe they could come as well for this? And so I just say, putting that out there to help a private landowner maneuver through that, because they may not know that, if that makes sense, coming up with this event.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really interesting.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And that is,
I have been proposed that question, and I was like, well, that definitely needs to be put on private landowners' radars and understanding. Most will know, but maybe not everybody knows. And they need to look at that contract or whatever that may be. It's kind of like when COVID happened and people who had these leases that came out in the hill country because they thought they could. And so make sure people know that, right, wrong, or however that's wrote.
so what you're saying is make sure that if you're a private landowner opening up your land, that you clearly define whether or not hunting will be permitted. Is that what you're saying?
No, ma'am. Those people who have the hunting lease versus those people that you are allowing to come onto your property to watch the eclipse may not be one and the same. Make sure you are reading what contract and what you're doing with your different peoples, if that makes sense.
Okay, I see what you're saying. That's a very good point. Yeah, that's definitely an arena I'm not as familiar with. So if there are any
it also, as they're trying to promote, we're all trying to promote this in the area, and you're saying, oh, okay, we'll allow this. And we want you all, the John Q public, but wait a minute, I have a contract with John Smith for hunting. What does that cover? How does that overlap? If that makes sense. Just a protection to their private landowners.
That's great. I may come back to you at a later date for some questions on that, maybe help us flush out some Q&A for folks. But that's a very valid point, especially for contract land. Susie points out, it looks like it's turkey season during that time. Good to know. That'll be another thing I can add to my long list of why folks would come to the hill country for these eclipses. You know, bluebonnet season, wildflower season, bird migration season, turkey season. All right, we've got about 10 minutes left. Any other comments, questions, conversation about presenting, speaking, or really anything else, Eclipse related? Feel free to chime in, unmute yourself, put it in the chat. Like I said, I'll stick around till 1 o'clock and beyond if need be, but just, putting out there, anybody who wants to discuss or ask questions about any specific aspect, please feel free to unmute yourself and chime in, or if you don't have audio, to stick it in the chat and we can read it out to folks. Actually, I'm going to put out a quick question to the J-Bar folks. Are you completely booked up yet? Or can folks still reach out to you for sanitation purposes?
We are not booked up. However, we have booked quite a few companies and private landowners for services throughout the hill country. But we will be able to, we partnered with companies throughout the state who will be bringing us restrooms. So we'll be able to provide as many restrooms as needed.
That's fantastic.
We plan on a full month of delivery and pickup and service and dumpsters, as well as the portable restrooms. But we're not booked up. We have a team here, and like I posted in the chat, we would be happy to discuss numbers. Whether you use us or not, we'd be happy to discuss numbers and how to provide the restrooms and the trash services for the number of people that you're expecting. It's something that we do, and we'd be happy to come visit your town halls, as you guys were talking about earlier.
That's fantastic. It's great to hear that you've, partnered with so many other companies, because I know that, restroom facilities, sanitation services are, a huge component. It's one of those things that, I've been messaging for a long time in my presentations, is if you're having an event of any kind, you make sure you get your porta potties and your hand washing station situated, and make sure your glasses are ordered, because those are going to be hard to come by.
They really do make or break an event, the restrooms. Last thing you want
Absolutely.
to have too little and have frustrated people.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I appreciate your willingness to talk to folks too, even if they don't use you, to use you as a resource, because the last thing you want to do is, order far too many and, not having needed to spend that money, but worst case scenario, ordering far too few.
Agreed. Well put. Thank you.
Thank you for being on the call today and for participating in these Lunch and Learn sessions. We're definitely happy to, provide these, and we are excited. We will be having our next session on September 12th. And as I mentioned, that'll be focusing on media and public relations. And that'll be with Eric Henriksen, who is the senior science reporter for KXAN News.